Welcome to another Tim Talk on disciple making. Tim Talks are short, poignant conversation starters or discussion of interest to really shake up the status quo in our local church, in the lives of believers like you and me, where fruitfulness in disciple making really hasn't come to maturity. Someone once said, if you want to see the big picture, you have to step outside of the frame. In this Tim Talk on disciple making, we're going to view the big story of God's purpose for you and me as disciple makers. If you've read Tolkien's trilogy on Lord of the Rings, you'll remember that one scene in the dark land of Mordor where Sam and Frodo were walking through towards their goal. And in a moment of enlightenment, Sam stopped and turned to his companion and said, "Mr. Frodo, I think we found ourselves in some type of a story." I would suggest to you that if you seriously consider disciple making, you too, along with me, find ourselves in some sort of a story that was birthed in the very heart of God, started in creation thousands of years ago, and now is being fulfilled through Jesus' call for us to go into the world and make disciples of all nations. In the very heart of God, his story is this. He's always wanted a people that he could call his own, who would love him freely by giving them the gift of free will, but also doing all within his power to woo them onto himself. So Adam and Eve were created in the newly formed Garden of Eden, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." I believe this first command and commission was far more than just to populate the planet with human beings. You see, God's in whose image we are created, and God as a spiritual being wants a spiritual legacy in people formed in his image who love him and want to serve him and be called his children as well. He chose the children of Israel in that regard and worked through their history. And then with the advent of Jesus coming, now the church are his people. The church is called the very body of Christ. But all throughout the pages of history, God has desired to call unto himself a people, spiritual beings as it were, living in this physical world who would glorify him and find great pleasure in him as well. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised when Jesus started his ministry that he picked up the same commission that was given to Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, because that's what the life of a Christ follower is all about. In the book of John, chapter 15, read through there, Jesus said, "You will show yourself to be my disciples if you bear much fruit." In Mark chapter 11 is the story of the fruitless fig tree. Jesus was hungry, and there was in the distance a fig tree in full leaf, apparently a very healthy specimen. But upon closer examination, when Jesus went to get some fruit, he realized that there was no fruit on this tree. And he cursed the tree in such a way his disciples heard him say it. You see, fig trees in the day of Jesus bore fruit as they grew leaves. Therefore, to find a fig tree full of leaves but no fruit, it was actually a very sick tree. Jesus was speaking somewhat symbolically or figuratively of the big leafy temple just over the next hill called the Temple of Jerusalem. It was big business. People were coming in, animals were being sacrificed, the smoke was rising, currency exchange was being made, but Jesus went in and turned over the tables and said, "This was to be a house of prayer for all the nations, but you've made it into a den of robbers." What was the robbery that was going on? I don't think it was the exorbitant exchange that the money changers were claiming. More from the heart of God, people were being robbed with a relationship with him, communion with him. And when Jesus told us as his disciples to go into the world and make disciples, he was carrying on this legacy of this story that we're part of, to go and share our lives as Christ shared his life with us. And as disciples or followers with Jesus, living our lives as if Jesus were living it through us, we get to continue this story, this love story between God and the created order of which we now find our part. So I want to challenge you in terms of seeing yourself as a disciple maker. to step outside of the frame and see the big picture of your life and what part you play as a disciple maker of Jesus Christ. Now, here are some disciple making questions for you to consider and digest based on this Tim Talk on disciple making.